The storm had rolled in without warning, turning the quiet morning sky into a churning mass of gray. As thunder cracked over the Windboro Animal Shelter, a trembling German shepherd lay curled in the darkest corner of her kennel, her breaths sharp, strained, almost desperate. The staff had named her Marra, found wandering alone near an abandoned barn just days earlier, her ribs showing, her fur matted with exhaustion and fear. No one knew her story. No one knew what she had survived. But that morning, as lightning flashed, Marra began to cry out in a way that made even the most seasoned shelter workers freeze in alarm. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and no one yet understood just how extraordinary the next few hours would become. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, compassion, and giving second chances to those who can't ask for help themselves, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our W Insights. Your support helps stories of hope reach more hearts. The moment the shelter's head vet, Dr. Rosalind Maris, rushed through the entrance, the air seemed charged not just with the storm, but with urgency. Rosalind was calm by nature, but the frantic call from the staff had shaken her. Marra wasn't due to give birth for at least another week based on her initial exam, but animals who had been through trauma often defy timelines. Rosalind grabbed her gloves, her stethoscope, and hurried into the dimly lit kennel hallway where the howling wind rattled the windows. Marra's eyes met hers wide, pleading, almost apologizing for the pain racking through her body. The trembling dog pressed herself against the cold floor, panting heavily as contractions overtook her. Rosalind knelt beside her, whispering softly, grounding the terrified animal with a steady touch. The shelter staff stood behind, watching with tightly held breaths, as the first of what they assumed would be puppies slowly emerged. But the moment Rosalind lifted the newborn in her hands, her face changed. Not in subtle confusion, but in full, visible shock. "This isn't a puppy," she whispered under her breath, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice trembled. "This is something else." Curled in her palms was a tiny creature, alive, breathing, warm, but clearly not a dog. Its features were too rounded, its limbs too small, its nose too blunt. It was a newborn, but not of the species they were expecting. The staff exchanged baffled looks, but Marra kept pushing, kept crying, kept delivering several more of the same strange little beings. Marra had given birth not to puppies, but to baby fox cubs. The room spun with confusion. The storm outside seemed to roar louder, as if echoing the shock inside the shelter. One of the assistants leaned closer, speechless. Another gasped softly. No one had ever seen anything like this. Rosalind gently placed the tiny cubs into a warm incubator and returned to help Marra finish the delivery. As the last cub arrived, weak and nearly unresponsive, Marra stretched her nose forward and nudged it with a trembling tenderness that could have broken anyone's heart. Once the chaos settled and Marra lay exhausted but calmer, Rosalind led the staff into her office, where she flipped through reference materials, medical notes, wildlife manuals, anything that could explain what had just happened. And for the first time in years, she admitted she had no immediate answer. But Marra had one. She whimpered softly from her kennel, nudging the air as if begging someone to understand. Over the next hours, Rosalind pieced together the clues. The way Marra had been trembling when found. The strong scent of foxes lingering faintly on her fur. The reports of a collapsed fox den near the barn where she'd been found. Slowly, painfully, truth took shape. Marra had not been pregnant. She had been trying to save the fox cubs. She had found them orphaned, perhaps after their mother was killed in a storm or by a predator. And she had carried them, one by one, in her mouth to safety just before the barn collapsed. The stress, the exhaustion, and her own unhealed wounds had caused her body to enter a rare state of pseudo-pregnancy, producing milk, hormones, and maternal drive strong enough to mimic actual labor. Her mind and body had fused into one instinct: protect the cubs no matter what. It made sense now. The desperate cries. The trembling. The urgency. She hadn't been giving birth, she had been mourning, fearing they were dying, begging for them to be saved. Rosalind sat in silent awe. Nature had always been miraculous, but this was a kind of love she had never seen before. In the following days, the shelter became a sanctuary of fragile hope. Marra stayed by the incubator, crying softly every time one of the fox cubs made a sound. Rosalind allowed her supervised visits, letting her sniff them, offering her reassurance. To everyone's surprise, Marra's milk began to flow fully, as if her body refused to give up on her role. So Rosalind made a decision that some would have questioned, but her heart knew it was the right one. She placed the smallest, weakest cub gently against Marra's belly. The moment the cub latched on, Marra froze. Then she let out a small, trembling exhale and rested her head on the blanket. She accepted him not as a strange creature, not as something unfamiliar, but as her baby. One by one, the cubs were introduced. And Marra, with patience and softness no one would have expected from a dog who had known nothing but hardship, became their mother. As days turned into weeks, the story of the German Shepherd who mothered fox cubs spread through Windboro. People drove from miles away just to catch a glimpse of Marra nurturing her unlikely family. Donations poured in. Volunteers lined up to help. For the first time in her life, Marra wasn't invisible, she wasn't unwanted. She was celebrated, a quiet hero who hadn't been trying to save herself, but to save the smallest, most fragile lives she had found. But even with the growing joy around her, a heavier question lingered: what would happen when the fox cubs grew older? The cubs thrived under Marra's care. Their eyes opened, revealing bright amber sparkles that followed her every movement. They tumbled around her legs, nipped playfully at her ears, slept curled against her stomach. Marra became their universe. And they became hers. Yet, Rosalind knew foxes had instincts that could not be suppressed. They were wildlife, meant for forests and open land, not for shelters or adoption. Marra's heart would break when they were released, but keeping them caged would break something even deeper in them. The morning the cubs were ready for their transition training, Marra sensed something shifting. She paced in front of their enclosure, whining softly. Rosalind approached her, kneeling so their eyes met. She placed a hand gently on Marra's head and whispered words she wasn't sure the dog could understand. "You saved them. You gave them a chance at life. Now we have to let them live it." Marra rested her head against Rosalind's shoulder as if seeking strength, and Rosalind held her until she stopped trembling. Over the next 2 months, the cubs were gradually prepared for the wild. Rosalind ensured Marra visited often, always supervised, allowing her to witness them growing stronger, braver, more capable. Every visit seemed to etch both pride and sorrow into her eyes. Then came the day no one was ready for. Dawn broke golden over the Windboro forest. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting warm shadows on the soft ground. Rosalind stood with her team near the release site, the cage doors open and waiting. The fox cubs, now confident juveniles, stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the new world they were about to call home.